The very mention of knighthood often conjures images of gleaming armor, valiant charges across verdant fields, and an age defined by chivalry, honor, and courtly love. Ballads sing of noble deeds. Illuminated manuscripts depict figures of pristine martial grace, and popular imagination places the knight on a pedestal of aristocratic privilege and effortless heroism. Yet, peel back the polished veneer of myth and romance, and what emerges is a far grimmer reality. The life of a medieval knight was one of profound hardship, relentless violence, and an often brutal, crushing existence that left indelible marks on both body and soul. Far from a gilded fantasy, his was a world steeped in blood, mud, and fear, where honor was often bought with agonizing pain, and the specter of a violent, ignoble end was a constant, unwelcome companion. This essay will plunge into the shadowed depths of the knight's reality, revealing the relentless physical torment, the pervasive psychological scars, and the precarious existence that utterly belied the shimmering ideal. But before we get started, don't forget to like and subscribe to stay up to date on all the latest videos. Now, let's get going. The most pervasive and defining brutality of a knight's life was the omnipresent shadow of warfare. This was not a rare, glorious event confined to distant battlefield, but a fundamental, inescapable state of being. Feuds between lords were common, border skirmishes constant, and the call to arms, whether for a large-scale campaign, a protracted siege, or simply to suppress local banditry, could come at any moment. From the tender age of 7, a knight's existence was a rigorous apprenticeship in violence, starting as a page in a lord's household, then progressing to a squire in his early teens. He was meticulously molded into a living weapon. His days were filled with endless training, mastering heavy weapons like the sword, spear, and axe, honing complex mounted combat techniques in a full panoply of armor, and developing formidable physical strength through wrestling, running, and climbing. This was no gentleman's sport. It was a brutal curriculum designed to forge a man capable of inflicting and enduring extreme violence. Broken bones, dislocated joints, chronic muscle strains, and permanent scars were not exceptions, but inevitable rites of passage, laying the grim foundation for a lifetime of persistent pain and physical deterioration before he even reached his prime. The iconic armor, the very symbol of knighthood, was a source of immense physical torment. Far from the lightweight, comfortable suits often depicted in modern media, a full panoply of plate or mail could weigh upwards of 50 to 70 pounds, distributed unevenly, restricting movement, vision, and breathing. Wearing this heavy shell for hours on end, often under a scorching summer sun or through chilling winter rains, during arduous marches or frenetic combat, was an exercise in pure, agonizing endurance. Knights frequently suffered from heat stroke, severe dehydration, exhaustion, and chronic chafing. The enclosed helmet, while offering vital protection, drastically limited peripheral vision and muffled sound, amplifying the terrifying chaotic cacophony of battle while simultaneously isolating the wearer in a suffocating metal cocoon. Minor injuries such as deep cuts and abrasions from ill-fitting plates rubbing against the skin were constant, and if left untreated in the unsanitary conditions of a medieval campaign, could quickly turn gangrenous and fatal. The romantic notion of a knight effortlessly leaping onto his steed or swinging his sword belied the immense physical effort required for every single movement. Beyond the weight of steel, the daily realities of medieval life compounded the knight's suffering. While knights held a higher social status than archers or foot soldiers, their lives were far from luxurious in the modern sense. Campaigns involved long, grueling marches across unforgiving terrain, through thick mud, deep snow, dense forests, and across treacherous rivers, often for weeks or months. Rations were consistently scarce, monotonous, and of poor quality, leading to constant hunger, malnutrition, and a susceptibility to illness. Hygiene was rudimentary at best. Medieval encampments were cesspools of waste, attracting vermin and breeding grounds for disease. Dysentery, camp fever, smallpox, and other virulent illnesses swept through armies like wildfire, fire, claiming more lives than enemy weapon. A knight who survived the direct brutality of battle was still vulnerable to the invisible, pervasive brutality of infectious disease, often with limited access to effective medical care beyond rudimentary and often agonizing field surgery, such as bone setting, without anesthesia or amputation with crude tools. Their temporary lodgings, whether tents or commandeered peasant huts, offered little respite or comfort from the harsh element. On the battlefield, the knight's role, though seemingly glorious, was fraught with a unique and profound terror. He was the shock weapon, the spearhead of the charge, expected to break enemy lines through sheer force and intimidation. This meant riding headlong into formations of spears, pikes, and arrows, knowing that his life depended on the strength of his horse, the integrity of his armor, and the swiftness of his blade. The impact of a cavalry charge was bone-jarring, a terrifying collision of man, horse, and weapon. In the ensuing melee, the knight fought in a brutal, chaotic, and often claustrophobic environment. Swords aimed for vulnerable joints, maces sought to crush bones beneath armor, and daggers were thrust through helmet visors or armpit gaps. Falling from a horse in full armor could be instantly fatal, or leave a knight stunned and vulnerable to disarming blows from dismounted foes, who would drag him to the ground for a ransom or a swift, brutal end. The psychological brutality faced by a medieval knight was arguably the most insidious. He was a killer, trained from a young age to take human life efficiently and without hesitation. The act of cutting down foes, often men driven by similar motivations or simply defending their home, would undoubtedly leave deep psychological scars. Witnessing the horrific carnage up close, the dismembered bodies, the gurgling cries of the dying, the desperation in a defeated enemy's eyes, was an inescapable reality of his profession. The constant fear of death was omnipresent, but perhaps even greater was the terror of capture. To be captured meant an agonizing period of imprisonment, often involving torture, starvation, or unspeakable indignities, while one's family scrambled to raise a crippling ransom that could bankrupt generations. The knight lived with the knowledge that his life, his freedom, and his family's financial ruin rested on the unpredictable whims of battle and the mercy, or lack thereof, of his captor. This constant dread, coupled with the moral ambiguities of fighting for often opportunistic or treacherous lords, fostered a pervasive anxiety and a grim, fatalistic worldview. Beyond direct combat, siege warfare was a protracted and arguably even more brutal experience for a knight. Whether besieging a castle or defending one, the conditions were appalling. As a besieger, a knight would endure months of exposure, disease, and monotony, often sleeping in cold, damp conditions while constantly wary of sallies from the fortress. If assaulting a breach, he faced a hail of arrows, stones, and boiling liquids, or the terrifying prospect of hand-to-hand combat in tight, chaotic confines. As a defender, the brutality was slow and agonizing. Starvation, thirst, constant bombardment, and the psychological strain of watching friends and family succumb to disease or enemy fire. The stench of death would become commonplace. The choice often became between a desperate suicidal sally or the slow, inevitable surrender, often leading to slaughter or ignominious captivity. The glory of a valiant defense was almost always overshadowed by the grim reality of prolonged suffering. Furthermore, the social and economic obligations of knighthood added another layer of burden. Maintaining the image and lifestyle of a knight was prohibitively expensive. The cost of a full suit of custom-made armor, multiple war horses, squires, armorers, and a retinue of retainers was astronomical. Even for landed knights, managing their estates and generating sufficient income to sustain this lifestyle was a constant struggle, often leading to debt or desperate measures. Loyalty to a lord, while romanticized by chivalric codes, was a complex and often perilous affair. A knight's fortunes rose and fell with his lords, and a misstep, a perceived betrayal, or a changing political wind could lead to the confiscation of lands, titles, and even execution. The strict codes of honor, while promoting virtues, could also condemn a knight to participate in vendettas, duels, or engagements against his better judgment, simply to uphold his reputation. The very oaths he swore could bind him to acts of extreme brutality. In conclusion, the idealized image of the medieval knight, shining brightly on the pages of romance, obscures a far darker, more agonizing truth. His life was not one of comfortable privilege, but a relentless ordeal defined by constant physical pain, profound psychological trauma, and a pervasive, inescapable brutality. From the excruciating training that molded his body into a weapon, to the suffocating weight of his armor, to the terrifying chaos of battle, every aspect of his existence was a test of endurance against overwhelming odds. The constant specter of death, the crippling fear of capture, and the grim realities of disease and famine were not footnotes but defining characteristics of his daily grind. The medieval knight, far from a carefree hero, was a hardened survivor, eternally bound by the weight of steel and the shadow of death, his valor forged in a crucible of suffering that few modern minds can truly comprehend.